Smash is a digital museum of the history of our weird gamer culture, yet the ultimate version of this super crossover still has more room to grow. There are entire genres left completely unrepresented, and if anyone's going to get the brownie points for coming up with the cleverest, most outside picks, it's going to be me. If that line sounds oddly familiar, then that's because I did a similar vid already where I named 10 different characters who I feel would best suit the game, plus 16 other mentions and runners-up. That was 2 whole DLC characters ago though, and I haven't stopped thinking about it, so here are 10 more. To review, the only rules are to not just go for dream picks or predictables, but to pick characters who would best suit the game as a cultural keystone in a fun fighting game. Number 10. Alright, so the Achilles heel of the top 10 format is that you have to start with the least interesting pick. And to be real, this one's become kind of cringe with all the memeing, so let's just rip it off like a band-aid. It's Waluigi. The reason I even bother with him is because Mario has become more than just a platformer icon. You got Mario Kart, Mario Party, Mario Sports, and while all those games do get represented in Smash, they don't get their own dedicated character. All those titles pretty much get relegated to items and Peach's side smash. Waluigi, being a character developed exclusively for those titles, could represent those games well, and being a cheat, it would be totally fitting for him to be pulling out random BS, like red shells, dice, and bob-ombs to screw around and just generally cause havoc. Characters like Link and Peach, who can just spawn items, have always had some cool tech show up as a result, and I imagine Waluigi could have some pretty stellar stuff too given the chance. Again, he's only number 10 because he's kind of a nobody and it would be more realistic to just rework Daisy a bit, but at the end of the day people want him and he could represent an entire spectrum of games, so he made it on the list. You can say a lot about Waluigi, but you can't say he didn't make it on the list. Number 9. It cannot be overstated how hard the likes of Dante and Nero got robbed of a higher ranking. They only just barely came out above the likes of Waluigi. But they just have a lot of cons. Dante has been in fighters before, neither character has much history with Nintendo, Bayo already reps character action, and they all heavily rely on handguns and long combos, which are difficult to do right in this genre. If this were a list of favorite characters, they'd rank higher, but since this is more about who would fit in and what isn't repped yet, they just got jiffed. With all that said, Dante's different stances and Nero's air grabs would be pretty stylish if they were in. People joke about how big brain you have to be to play Shulk, but instead of switching between different buffs, Dante would switch between styles, which I imagine would have to change every single one of his normals. Either his down or neutral special would have to cycle between or bring up his options respectively. To be honest, I'm more excited for Nero since he's never got much push, and I always thought Smash would be really interesting with air grapples. Gen's up and side special moves are sick off stage, so I bet Snatch and Buster would be incredibly stylish in general. Rocket punches are also always a plus. Again, I feel bad for these two being so low on the list, but perhaps I'm just trying to keep my expectations low to avoid heartbreak. Number 8. There's no rhythm game rep in Smash, which is kinda weird, but I guess there's not much of a rhythm game scene on Nintendo consoles either, so I guess it makes sense. The general consensus is that Rhythm Heaven Fever should get a spot, but the question is which minor character gets the invite. All these characters only really have 2 functions, and they're only 1/40th of a video game. Karate Joe punches, Wrestler X poses, and the Samurai slices, but that's not really enough for a moveset. However, it's not like Sakurai hasn't made characters like that work before. The Duck Hunters are a combination of multiple characters from multiple games that didn't really interact before being introduced in Smash. So the Rhythm Heaven Fighter could be kinda like that. I'll not speculate on which specific character or characters should get the pick, since it's unlikely that I'll guess the right choice, but I don't think it's too unrealistic to speculate on what the moveset might be like. To best emulate a rhythm game, there needs to be timed inputs similar to Incineroar's side special, but it also needs to synergize with some sort of beat, which might be a struggle since the game can't just stop to play a number every time someone picks this fighter. DK's final Smash and Brawl was too long and not very fun for either player. I think it would be best for the game to emulate Duck Hunt's side special and summon assists that do their own thing. Then the player could sync up with the background characters with neutral special for a combination attack. For example, their up special could set up a rocket on a timer. When the timer hits 0, the player could hit B to gain some vertical space. Their side special could bring out the portal from Samurai's Slice that could sporadically spawn demons. If the player hits their neutral special with just the right timing instead of a single critter, it could spawn a Demon Rush. Those are just a couple ideas, it could be anything. I just want a rhythm fighting game. I'd even settle for Elite Beat Agents as a pick. Number 7. We're starting to get into the interesting picks, which means it's time to remind you that the person who's making this list is me, a hopeless Pokemon fool. Some games just lend themselves better to character crossovers, but despite that, the last few picks from Pokemon's ginormous roster haven't been too exciting. Greninja and Incineroar are cool and all, but I can't help but feel like Aegislash and Tapu Koko would have been less expected and more mechanically interesting. With Gen 8 somehow both excitedly new and desperately need of PR after the roster cuts, I think a new Galarian Mon would do a lot of good for everyone. Cinderace, Rillaboom, and Inteleon are fine, but starters have been done to death, so let's try to find something more off-script to keep things exciting. Mewtwo is the result of experimenting on the DNA of an ancient Pokemon, and the new games have decided to ask the question, what if that happened again, but the scientists were drunk? Dracofish is the answer. They took the head of an extinct fish and put it upside down on the tail of some sort of dinosaur dragon, and then just bent the whole thing over and boom! New Pokemon. It can only breathe underwater, it looks like it's in constant pain, and yet somehow it's actually a pretty strong fighter. Its signature move, Vicious Rend, takes advantage of a billion different tiny buffs, most notably doubling if it goes first. In Smash, that would probably take the form of a counter hitter aiming to do big damage and extra stun on trades, which isn't an archetype we've seen yet. You could even adapt the Choice Scarf by rewarding consecutive hits of the same attack in a row. Plus, Dracofish's, to put it gently, unique body shape would allow for some interesting normals, probably flexing between flailing around like a fish and using its head like a club. A more realistic guess would go to Toxtricity, but I don't want to have to think about that guy's nipples anymore, so I'm not putting him on the list. Number 6. This one is one of my top picks, but I ended up putting it lower on the list because it's going to be a bit different. He lost some points for technically being an Echo, and he lost some points because he's going to end up being a pretty unfaithful adaptation of an unpopular character from a franchise that may never see another entry. The only reason he gets any kind of shot at the list is because when Sakurai decided to adapt a character from a racing game, he, for some reason, made him the coolest thing ever. And when he was finishing up Melee, he had just enough time to throw in Ganon as a heavier echo of that awesome character. Dwarf has never done most of the things he does in Smash in his own games, and that's a disappointment because he's one of gaming's most iconic villains. It sucks that we can never get the epic back and forth that comes with a dead man's volley, without changing a character who people are very much attached to. Now we're in a no-win scenario where if we change Ganon, we lose an awesome moveset, and if we keep him the same, then we never get an iconic character. Black Shadow is F-Zero's generic big bad. He calls himself the king of quote-unquote evil, and that's all the characterization you need, which is good because that's all the characterization you get. He's a big, heavy Captain Falcon who could just steal Ganon's moveset, so we could get the new without trashing the old. My number 6 slot goes to this nobody, so we can maybe get a better version of someone we already got. Number 5. Smash is based around ring-outs, unlike most fighters which just use life bars. That said, there is a rare ability to instant kill someone which takes the form of moves like Thwack, Zelda's Final Smash, and the lava on Great Cave Offensive, and it's incredibly satisfying to land. I'd love to see a character built around this, and I think I know just the man for the job. Not only does Scorpion offer a unique gameplay opportunity, but I think it would also make Smash a more perfect time capsule of gaming sensibilities to have more violent psychotic murderers on the roster. No need to raise the game's rating, there doesn't have to be any blood or anything, but the game is missing out on an entire demographic if it completely ignores M-rated games. Immediate moves that jump out at me are of course the Get Over Here for a projectile grapple and the Teleport for a recovery, but also a Fatality for a down special that could work like a combination between Thwack and the Volcano Kick. It's got a long windup and a tiny hitbox, but if you get the positioning just right, then you land an uppercut that pops the opponent, leaving only an unrealistic amount of skeletons, taking a stock at even 0%. It'd need to be balanced of course, but functionally it wouldn't need to be too different from a Warlock Punch. The only viable way to land it would be via a shield break. Number 4. If Scorpion feels like a bit of a stretch for a Nintendo console, then perhaps a more appropriate blood-soaked sadist would be the Doomslayer. Smash could finally get some FPS representation, which up until now only had Metroid Prime and Duck Hunt. Those are not exactly emblematic of the genre. With that said, guns have never been the best in Smash. Projectiles and keep away work fine, but fast, tiny bullets like from Bayo and Joker's handguns aren't particularly fun to use or play against. That's why I think it would be rad for Doomslayer to primarily use a chainsaw. I imagine revving up a melee weapon would be enough to differentiate his normals from other characters, and then he could bring out the big guns for specials. You could even copy-paste the fatality mechanic from earlier and then just present it as the glory kill system from the more recent Doom. Number 3. Assist trophies and Mii costumes should be removed from the game. Not only do they feel like salt in the wound when an exciting character doesn't make it in, but they also dull the hype for their inclusion in the sequel. In Ultimate, both the frontrunners for indie game representation are now stuck in this weird bittersweet purgatory. It's an achievement for Sans and Shovel Knight to even be present, but it stinks that they'll never get a hype reveal trailer, now that they aren't completely out of the blue. Who could be a fresh indie rep with enough wow factor for a satisfying trailer? Well, it's definitely a third choice, and it may be a bit recent, but Madeline from Celeste's mobility would translate very well into Smash if they could get the dash right. An awakened pink hair Madeline could just end up with Pikachu's up special, but that's essentially a free ledge once you know how to use it. So I think it might be cool to have the recovery come out of the farewell chapter, where you have a single dash that you could refresh with creative use of Madeline. If neutral special threw out one of her shadow orbs, then Madeline could touch them for some verticality and a refreshed recovery. Or it could be used more offensively if opponents who ran into them got dunked. It's incredibly satisfying in the base game to get a jump back in the air, and characters from platformers tend to make the transition into Smash pretty well. So I think Madeline would make for both a fun character and an out-of-the-blue indie pick. The only downside is that she's definitely a third choice for indie game representation, and a fourth pick if you count this next one. Number 2, in the previous entry we talked about a 2018 Game of the Year, but for this one we're talking about a Game of the Decade. In the coming apocalypse, when all that's left of humanity is the internet and the aliens come down, we need to make sure they know that in 21X we were all collectively scared of a certain green penis. Steve has become a pretty popular choice, and that's a decent pick. Minecraft will go down as one of the most momentous games of the last 10 years. But since he's a generic guy with a bow and sword, I'd rather have the Creeper. Not only does that give the player access to self-harming explosive moves, but his unique shape will allow for interesting normals. That's a big reason why Piranha Plant made it in. As for special moves, I see his down B as a TNT block that works similarly to Pac-Man's Fire Hydrant. It starts out as a downward projectile that becomes a piece of geometry that can be stood on or set off if hit. Furthermore, his side special could set up a dispenser that shoots out arrows. By combining the two, you could set up a Rube Goldberg machine, which would be pretty sick for combo videos. Neutral special would be naturally the big damage Kamikaze style explosive move, which would activate if you held the button down, or you could just feint by tapping it. That would lead to some pretty tense mind games. To review, number 10, repping Mario's side games, Waluigi. Number 9, repping The Hype, Dante and Nero. Number 8, repping rhythm games, anything from Rhythm Heaven Fever. Number 7, repping the diverse and bizarre world of Pokemon, Dracovish. Number 6, repping The Legend of Zelda, Black Shadow. Number 5, repping Uber Violence, Scorpion. Number 4, repping the FPS, The Doomslayer. Number 3, repping Indies, Madeline. Number 2, repping the Game of the Decade, The Creeper. And my number 1 pick will be revealed after a couple of honorable mentions. For an alternative FPS rep, Tracer might make for satisfying risky plays if she could just rewind herself from otherwisely suicidal maneuvers. If that's no good, then the Spy could set up a dead ringer to fool the opponent into thinking they got a hit while going for an invisible backstab. Big Boss could be a stealth rep who actually used stealth by combining Tranks and CQC instead of just flinging explosives all over the place. A Tetronimo also feels too iconic to pass up, and what would be better than the square block Smash Boy for Smash? Boy? Yes, the Tetris blocks have names, yes, the square is named Smash Boy, and yes, I was enough of a nerd to make a joke about that in my internet video. I almost put Akira Howard from Astral Chain on the list as well, since they'd make for a much more interesting version of a puppet character than Rosalina and Luma. But ultimately, if Dante only made 9th, what chance did the new guy stand? Are you still mad about the Tetris thing? Let's just move past that, okay? Okay. I would have put Hagar on the list if I hadn't briefly mentioned him in the previous vid. While he has been in fighters before, the beat-em-up genre has gone completely unrepped in Ultimate, despite being an iconic staple of the arcade era. He's the obvious top pick in my opinion, but in order to not sound redundant, I considered a good number of other characters, which would offer their own spice, but all felt a bit bland on their own. The clear second choice was Billy and Jimmy from Double Dragon, but despite being pretty flashy in Neon, I doubt they'd be able to stand out that much in Smash. Third place would go to Ricky and Kunio from River City Ransom, which got some pretty cool tools in the most recent installment, but if you take from that game you lose the Pompadour, so hard pass. After that comes the girlfriends Misako and Kyoko, who both managed to be both in recent memory and mechanically interesting. The powerful dab attack is sure to be popular, but these two lose out a bit on the arcade nostalgia, since they were never playable in any retro games. I even considered a best of both worlds choice in Abobo, who appears in both franchises as a boss. But at that point, it feels like I'm reaching pretty hard for a genre that isn't very relevant nowadays. I had a few ideas for alternative Mario and Link movesets I would have put on the list, if it didn't seem like retreading old ground. These characters have been in so many games that it's only natural to give them more slots, but it does feel like resources are being spent on something that may not seem very exciting. With that said, Paper Mario, Cappy, Flood, Wolflink, Fierce Speedy, and the Sheikah Slate all offer interesting opportunities for gameplay that don't actually share much with their respective counterparts. They would be all new movesets just with old faces, but that still feels like cheating, though they didn't make the cut. We have a scourge of Fire Emblem characters in the game, and the only cure is more Fire Emblem characters. Interesting ones though. If we add Ike's nemesis, the Black Knight, into Smash, as more than just an assist trophy, then we can finally give the series a heel, not just another mid-range blue-haired anime face. The fun part about Fire Emblem is enjoying all your different colorful characters so much that you'd hate to see them perma-die, so using the relatable blank slate who's only there for projection purposes as a representation of the game as a whole isn't the best. At least not for the purpose of a fighting game where players express their personality by picking their own character. He's one of the best units from one of the best Fire Emblem games. How often do you see a losable final boss fight? And if you imagine how scary Ike would be if he had armor on his smash attacks, then you can tell he'd make for some pretty interesting matchups. Overall, he's just an honorable mention because he's mega unlikely from an unpopular, overrepresented game. But I think he'd be fun, and since his blue hair is hidden beneath a helmet, he might even appeal to Smash fans who aren't complete weebs. Lastly, my idea for Trevor Belmont was actually a more elaborate plan to make Richter and Simon play more different at the same time. Simon would remain the same in order to keep the old playstyle, but Trevor and Richter could be heavily remixed. Trevor would have knives replacing the cross, which would sacrifice the boomerang effect for extra damage. Combine that with Time Stop replacing the Holy Water, and suddenly we've got Dio Brando in Smash. As for Richter, Holy Water would become a slower version of Cloud's Down B, which would turn his specials into item crashes. For example, down special at full charge would become Hydro Storm as a huge AoE with no knockback that could rapidly rack up percentage as long as it's active. The catch is that his charge times would be crazy long, so we could get away with making them as busted as they are in the actual game. I'm thinking nearly 3 times as long as Mewtwo's Shadow Ball. Ultimately, not on the list because no one wants to hear about clones on a top 10, but I snuck it into the video, now didn't I? I tricked you into listening to my internet opinion. I fooled you. Enough of that. Time for my top pick. Number 1, the ultimate pick needs to not only make for satisfying gameplay and fit in as an icon of gaming history, but even more basically than that, it needs to make for an exciting reveal that not only catches the culture by surprise, but also redefines who else could make the cut going forwards. We need a mechanically fun, historically iconic, exciting, unsuspected game changer. I'm gonna try and get ahead of this next one because this choice may shock you. This character gets the number 1 spot not because he's a particularly good fit, but because he's kind of not. He's the ultimate character with the best resume and maximum amount of legal BS in the way. You listening to this video may find yourself staggered and aghast by such a lame meme of the #1 choice after slogging through what would otherwise be a passable, if optimistic list, but here's my justification. Close your eyes and imagine you're watching a far-off direct, and this video is not but a repressed memory, and then Sakurai looks the camera in the eyes and actually, honestly, and unironically drops Bond, James Bond, into the game. As your eyes widen, you'd flash back to this exact moment of you watching this internet video of me fucking calling it. Look at your hands, you're gonna remember this moment. Should these events transpire, you would be forced to dig up this then outdated video and praise me for having such clairvoyance. I'm not just throwing a movie character into the video game. There is logic behind this decision. 007 is less of a ridiculous pick when you reflect on Goldeneye's influence on the FPS genre and the FPS's influence on the gaming medium. He was actually considered before as a fighter for Melee. Goldeneye is the quote-unquote top-secret origin of the proxy mine, but a bunch of legal hurdles made it difficult. Namely, Sakurai didn't want to show realistic guns, a rule broken by Joker. He couldn't use a character from a Rare game, a rule broken by Banjo, and he couldn't get the rights to the movies. That's the problem I intend to dodge by representing Bond as a character from 007 Nightfire, a video game not based on a movie. To differentiate from the other sneaky secret agent, Bond could use gadgets and trick weapons disguised as mundane objects. A laser beam watch for down special that bounces off geometry. A grapple gun phone for recovery that would work well vertically but not horizontally. And perhaps most iconically, Oddjob's hat for side special. A long-distance, big-damage, slow projectile that could be sped up by shooting it with your neutral special, which I see as the PP7, but if realistic weapons are still a sore spot, then you could just use the golden gun instead. You'd shoot what was essentially a fully charged version of Link's bow, but instead of a long wind-up, it'd have a long recovery while you reload. As for smashes, you could have the taser keys for F smash, flashbang for down, perhaps a rocket launcher for up smash, and that's a video game character in the video game. In the previous video, I said if I didn't mention one of your favorites, then it's not because I forgot, but because you have bad taste. I take that back, now that I've been sitting on all these other picks. But now there really is no excuse. Between the 20 medal winners, a total of 30 runners-up, and 12 mentions, we've cleared 100 dudes in the game. If there's another character on your mind, you can put him in the comments, but you'd really just be embarrassing yourself. Smash will go on to become a time capsule of our weird gamer culture. And even if Sakurai decides to retire going forwards, his work will need to be carried on since we can't really call it ultimate until the gaming annals are fully recorded.